Has expired. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Madam Acting President. Thank you, Senator Mason too. And I just want to start off saying I agree in part with Senator Ludlam. Although I have no theological opposition to nuclear power too, it is too costly, thanks to the bountiful and cheap sources of fossil fuel we have in this nation. And I just take one issue though. If I understand that why, therefore, we wouldn't build nuclear in this nation, at least not at the moment, given its cost. I'm not sure why we wouldn't sell uranium to other countries who want to use it, even if that does mean a higher cost source of power for them. If they feel they'd like to use higher sources of energy than we do, that's up to them, and if we can make money selling them the uranium, that should be great too. But I actually don't want to focus on negative things today. I think sometimes we focus on far too many negative things. Certainly, I was reflecting the other day when I look back at the speeches I've made in this place, I probably have spent too much time talking about debt and drought and why the Greens, I don't like them and all those sort of things. But I want to talk on something more positive. Senator Ludlam, I want to be more positive today, so I'll try not to attack you too much. Because we do live in a very lucky country, as the saying goes. It's not perfect, but we're a very decent, strong and progressive nation. We are very, very lucky to live in a country that's now had 23 years of uninterrupted economic growth. And I think that's something we don't reflect on long enough. It is the second longest period of uninterrupted economic growth in world history, or in recorded world history. It's only beaten by the Netherlands after they discovered oil in the North Sea, and we're very lucky. It's sometimes said that we're only lucky because people want to buy our coal and iron ore, and that's contributed. It certainly has contributed, but only in that second half of that 20-year period has that been a major factor. Indeed, in the first 10 or so years in this 23-year period, we had very low mining prices and low terms of trade. And the reason we were able to enjoy this economic growth is our productivity. The seed from all what we benefit from, the seed of everything, all the fruit that we're lucky enough in this country to reap is productivity. Our ability to grow more food on less land with fewer workers lets other workers in our hospitals care for our sick, others to teach for our children, and a few of us to create great works of art, and even fewer of us to give speeches in this grand place. In the early decades of the 20th century, agriculture accounted for around one quarter, quite a lot of our total employment in Australia, and produced just under 1/3 of our GDP. The Food and Agricultural Organisation shows that wheat yields in developing countries have increased from around 800 kilograms per hectare in 1960 to in excess of 2,500 kilograms today. So we've always had a problem feeding the world, but that has been massively made easier through better productivity. A culture without a productive economy has never produced high works of art, and the more productive that economy is, the more resources are available to spend on the things in life that are not free, but they are the best things. Our children, our art, our health, none of them are free, and the best things in life are not free. They must be paid for, and the only way to pay for them in the long run is by producing wealth. We have had a strong economy for the past 2 decades, and we have produced much more wealth in that time. 2 decades ago, in about 1993, our economy was worth $783 billion a year. We produced that much wealth a year, or about $44,600 per person. Now, today, the economy is more than $1.5 trillion in size, almost doubling, and we produce around $66,500 in wealth per person. That's a $22,500 difference. In just 20 years, the sons and daughters of the workers of 20 years ago can now afford to buy a new car every year relative to their parents, just 20 years ago. But that history, that last 2 decades has been a tale of two halves, as I said earlier. The first decade was marked by strong productivity growth. I think it was about 1.2% a year for the first 10 years, much higher than other countries in the world, much higher than our historical average. We benefited from falling electricity prices in this period, increasing competition and less restrictive capital and labour markets. The second half of this period was also marked by strong economic growth, but the growth occurred in spite of negative productivity growth. From 2002 to 2013, multi-factor productivity growth, which is a broad measure of productivity, grew by actually negative 0.2% per year, a long way from the historical average of 0.7% per year that we've achieved over the last 30 years. The only reason we sustained high levels of economic growth in such an environment was because of the growth in our terms of trade. A few years ago, Glenn Stevens said famously that in 2005, a shipload of iron ore was worth about the same as would be able to buy about 2,200 flat screen TVs. By 2010, that same shipload of iron ore could buy 22,000 flat screen TVs. Now that was both because TV prices fell, but also because iron ore rose by a factor of 6. Now iron ore has fallen, so the picture's not quite as rosy today. And these are my calculations, not Glenn Stevens, so take them with a grain of salt. But by my calculations, a shipload of iron ore today would only buy around 11,000 flat screen TVs. So we're half the wealth in that iron ore than we had just 4 years ago. But on the positive side, it's 5 times worth. It's 5 times the purchasing power of 10 years ago. And higher prices for iron ore are not sustainable. And if we want economic growth in the future, we're going to have higher productivity or increase the utilisation of our capital and labour. And I want to focus on the productivity side of things in the remaining time I have today. Because productivity growth is a powerful force because it's compound growth and it compounds year on year. So if in the next decade, if we were able to grow our productivity at the same rate as our historical average, 0.7% a year, over the 10-year period, our average Australian would be $6,300 better off. $6,300, just if we maintain or get back to our historical growth in productivity compared to the near zero levels of productivity growth we've had in the past 10 years. Now, I just want to put that in a little bit of context. It's $6,000. It's something we can probably all consider. It's a lot of money. And the carbon tax, which we spent a lot of time debating in this place, and I think rightly so, it costs the average Australian household around $300 a year. But this debate on productivity could benefit Australians if we were able to achieve those goals of $6,000 a year. So, in some sense, this productivity challenge is 20 times, 20 carbon taxes put together. It's 20 times more important than the carbon tax. But we don't spend 20 times the time debating that issue. Productivity is a hard concept to get across, but it is very, very important. We spend a lot of time talking about the budget in this place, and again, rightly so. We spend upwards now of nearly $400 billion of other people's money in this place a year, so it should take up a considerable amount of our time and debate. But again, productivity is actually very important to the overall budget debate, even though it doesn't really feature in any of the budget papers, because our budget is a function not just of the $400 billion that we spend, but how much that $400 billion is of the size of the pie. And right now, it's around 26.5% of that pie, that $400 billion, a bit under $400 billion at the moment. But if we were able to maintain that productivity growth over the next decade, as I said, the historical productivity growth, that without any budget cuts at all, our spending relative to GDP would fall from 26.5% to 25%, which is the historical average over the last 30 years. So without any budget cuts, just if we just dealt with productivity and were able to lift that, we'd go a long way to fixing our budget. Doesn't mean we'd necessarily pay back the debt we have accumulated, but we would go a long way to dealing with the budget problems we have. Now, the only way we're going to do that is focusing on areas which are going to deliver productivity growth. And there's no silver bullet. There's no one policy or one piece of legislation which is going to fix everything. But we do need to focus on the things that got us to that strong levels of productivity growth in the 1990s. We do need to get serious about reducing electricity prices. Again, the carbon tax is a component of that. But other things like the renewable energy target which lift electricity prices, our network and access regulation that does need reform, and the AER are looking at that at the moment. All those things, lower electricity prices will mean manufacturing will be stronger, there will be more jobs and more productivity for our businesses. We need to look at areas of our nation that we can invest in and get greater productivity out of those areas. I was up in the Gulf region recently on a cattle property, and it produces around $2,000 a hectare in beef every year. But if we were able to turn that into cotton production through irrigation, it would produce many, many times of that. It would produce around 10 bales of cotton, would produce around $5,000 a hectare. It would be a great increase in productivity. Now, I noticed there's a report in the paper today which says there's only 4 million hectares of irrigated land available in the north. Only 4 million hectares. That's what it actually says. Only 4 million hectares. There's only 2 million hectares of land in the whole country that is irrigated right now. So that report's a bit like saying there are only 300 Spartans at Thermopylae.